Ever thought I'd die fighting side by side with a Kusoge?
What about side by side with a friend?
I could do that. Slave? What are you doing?
Hey, welcome back. Yeah, as you can see, I'm filming a video right now. Could you not bother me right now? You know, this is probably one of the few times that I actually don't need you around.
So, what? I don't think I follow what you're talking about.
Yeah, well, it so happens that I actually got my hands on the Kusoge myself this time. No need to rely on you getting your shit and getting yourself into trouble for me to make a video. And it so happens I got it right here, as you can see in all of its grit and glory. Although I guess the reason I got this is because it isn't as shit as the shit that you usually pull out. I feel like for some reason, even though you don't seem to actually try for it, you seem to find the words of Kuso. I don't know if you're a savant or something and that just happens to be your talent, but either way, I'm gonna make a video about this game to talk about why it actually isn't as shit as it is made out to be within Japan, so yeah, that's all I'm doing today. We don't need you and your horrible things this time.
I don't pick games because of the fact that they are bad or whatever the word you use is. I pick them because they're important money-making tools to improve my life and standing. Just like this new one I got right here, which I need your help with.
Nope. Away with you. I have a video to be making. Now, if you excuse me, I have more important things to do. How does it feel that the shoe's on the other foot this time?
Yeah, I guess it's already starting to feel a little lonely with him being like this. Hopefully he gets over his little phase of whatever is wrong with him soon.
You know, when I set out to make this series on all of the console games that are out there within Japan, suffice to say it wasn't on my calendar for 2025 that I will be both simultaneously calling a game a console game, as well as trying to defend it at the same time, but in the end, it would seem that this is the point where we're at, because the game we're talking about today is one that I can see being a console game because it really isn't that good, but at the same time, it is one that I feel that the community in Japan tends to be a little bit more harsh with, in spite of the fact that there was some content in it that I would say actually justifies it being a little better, because the thing is that when it comes to console games, they kind of do exist on a spectrum. It's not just a clear black or white thing, right? Which is precisely why you have things such as a Kusoge ranking, because some just happen to be a lot worse than others, even though they all exist within the spectrum of console. So come, join me on this adventure as I try to justify why this adventure game is actually not as console as one might think, because the game we're going to be talking about today arguably may have been blown out of proportion a little bit in how console it is, and that game is Rozen Maiden Duellwalzer, a subtitle so hard to remember I had to actually look at the games box every single time I wanted to Google it to do research about it. In a game that's so good, the title even made it one of their best games. For recommendation. This is basically a visual novel. I don't know why Taito was even recommending it as one of their best, especially with the reputation it had. But it doesn't matter. Maybe they were hoping they could sell more copies of the game to make back how much they had lost from trying to produce this game in the first place. But for those of you who do not know what Rozen Maiden is, it's a fairly recent manga series that was released sometime in 2002 by Sendo Bandi and Ebara Shibuko, creators of other series such as Shugo Kyara, Diaz, as well as Wandering Wonder Wall, which reminds me a little of Balanced Wonder Wall, but I can promise you it's nowhere as bad as that one is. So the story of Rozen Maiden, to condense it down for those who don't really know about it, it's about a NEET who kind of knows how to knit. And his mysterious misadventures after coming across a strange letter in the mail, which, because he didn't read the fine print of the letter before signing the contract as he should, lands him in some kind of mysterious battle royale that has taken place for almost a century as dolls try to compete to become the perfect doll. And because of when this series came out and the type of content within it, you could kind of attribute perhaps some of the fetish that people seem to have for doll and ball joints. I wouldn't be surprised if this show was the progenitor of many people awakening to the king that is their fascination with ball joints. focus. Anyway, the anime also an opening by Ali Project, which just saying that name really makes me feel extremely old. But the music that they did was pretty definitive of some of the anime openings in that era. And the anime itself was a fairly interesting slice of life, battle, fantasy thing, also with an interesting subplot about the main character's growth as a person over time, coming out of his shell, overcoming trauma and all of that. It ended up being fairly interesting. For those of you who have not watched it, I recommend if you're interested in watching some older anime as well. This, while not the oldest that one might recommend, is still something that would be hopefully interesting to you guys to watch as well. That said though, while the anime itself was good, that doesn't mean that this game was gonna be good though. Because as we know, there are a lot of cash grabby, like shitty anime based games out there. Aren't there? And with today's game, we're gonna be looking at what might actually be the closest thing to a Kusoge game that is also a visual novel. I know that with Sengoku Hime, it was technically a game that has some visual novel elements, but the thing with that game is that in the end, the strategy world conquest part of that game does tend to occupy a much greater amount of the screen time and the play time than the visual novel segments. I would say that during my experience with that game, maybe 60 to 70% of the game, maybe even more, was purely in that strategy segment, and the cutscenes where you had the visual novel segments with the characters tended to be quite few and far between, if anything. So I'm not really counting that one as purely a visual novel, although some of the later titles kind of feel like that. But with today's game, we're talking about one where I would say 90% of the game is a visual novel. So you might be wondering then, how does one even fuck up a visual novel so hard that people even begin to consider it a soul game in the first place when there's so little in terms of gameplay that you can mess up? Is it by writing a very poor story? Well, if that's the case, then why isn't
insert visual novel name here
in this thing then? Is what some people would say, alright? I know what you guys are thinking. Alright, even without having actual time wizard powers, I can see into your mind and predict what you're gonna say before it. And if you're interested in finding out how they messed it up, go on and stay tuned because we're gonna get into it right now. The main menu itself is really not the best. I think I talked about this in some of the other Kusoge game videos as well, but it really is quite important to ensure that the main menu itself sets a good tone for the rest of the game, because right now it just feels extremely cheap, which I feel can actually end up giving the players the wrong impression of the game as well, because you have the image of one of the characters there, but it's super pixelated as well. Most likely because it's an image taken directly from the anime. The buttons that are used for all of the different options that you can go to, like the load and the new game, that spinning 3D effect looks extremely cheap as well. And even when you go into the options, it is quite limited in the things that you can set from there, and you just have like some weird like shooting option which is set at normal, which isn't really explained to you like what this even is. So a lot of things are just all over the place right off the bat, which really like kind of hurt my expectations for what were gonna come ahead, to be honest. When you're scrolling through the main menu as well, you do have some of the characters within the game talking to you, and it does seem like they actually do respond based off the time of the day, because when I played the game at night, they would actually give me lines like, and when I did play the game in the afternoon, the lines were kind of like, so it does seem like they actually added in like small teasers like this as well. A little bit fan servicey, which I feel like is good for this style of game, since this is basically a game that's meant to basically give more, at least in my opinion, content for people who enjoy the series. So small fan servicey things like this as well, I feel are very important to the overall experience of trying to sell the IP game to its audience. As for the visual novel segment itself, the game moves along using standard text boxes on the screen, scrolling for dialogue, with still images of the characters on the screen representing who is talking or participating, and sometimes changing those out for those of other characters. Very standard stuff, nothing too innovative over here, although you don't really expect there to be too much to innovate within this segment, especially back in that period. This is also supported with the use of CG or images of an entire scene or action to depict better what is currently happening within it. But that said, from a technical standpoint, it just feels like there's just so many things within this that just weren't very well executed. And there were just so many quality of life features that were missing that it just felt very lackluster, even for something as simple as creating the visual novel experience. You know, basic things like a log feature for me to see if I missed any of the text, or maybe if there was a specific line that was said that I didn't really manage to catch well and I wanted to take a double back and just look through the line again. There isn't really a feature for me to do that within this game, which not only is it something that I would expect as standard practice for a visual novel, since the whole point of the genre is that you're basically reading a novel and you want to ensure that people can read and double back and read through the lines that they may have missed or need more time to reflect and think about before moving on, because the whole point of the game is the novel. And not only that, but this is a feature that many RPG games have also already started to adopt. Even if it was to the point of something super rudimentary where you couldn't like select the specific lines and listen to the voice lines again, just a simple log saying like the character A said this, character B said this, and so on and so forth feels like it would have improved the experience a whole lot more, as it would have made it easier to double check lines rather than having to reload the entire save from however far back the last quick save I made was. Speaking of saving, what they do actually have a way for you to save anytime you want, in the sense that while the conversations are going on, you can push the start button to go to a menu to save the game. You can't actually do this during the dialogue choices segments themselves. So when the dialogue choice pops up asking you to pick one of the choices to move the story forward, they don't actually let you save anymore at that point, even though I feel like that should be the most important point where people will want to save, since if you're worried about the forking paths in the story, the point where you want to save the most is at these dialogue choices where the game would start to fork instead. So the fact that during these important points you can't save and you can't really load easily as well means that when these points pop up, if you want to actually save before them, which is quite standard practice in many visual novels, you're then going to have to reload to your previous save, go to just before the dialogue option pops up, and then save the game there. The sound balance is also a little off at times. Like, just look at the scene here.
スギートはお父様の愛が欲しくてアリスになろうとしていたんです。その思いだけでミディアムなしで動いていたの。
それでみんなを壊して自分こそが完璧なドールだとお父さんに言いたかったのか。
でもそれが歪んだ思いになってしまった。これがジュン君の木。はいです。相変わらずちっちゃいの。
僕がこのハサミで周りに絡みついている邪魔な草を切って、
シンクも水成績も何もみんな書いてあげる。カンカン早く来ないかな。
あの分だと約束も忘れてそうだな。まあいいや。
Jesus, like it's so bad that you would think I was the one who did the sound balance instead. It just jumps at times from highs to lows, and sometimes, especially depending on the volume settings you have at the time, it could go from being extremely loud to suddenly you just can barely make out what the characters are saying at any point, and you just wonder if you have gone deaf from how loud the sound effects before had actually been. Although that said, in the game's defense though, and this is the first defense we'll give it, it does have a pretty nice save menu. And what I mean by this is that when you actually go into the menu to save the game, it actually shows you, aside from all of your different save points that you have, you actually get a little thumbnail as well as the time that you save with a image of the scene itself. And although it might be very difficult to see, they do have the text box of what was being said at the time also saved into the thumbnail itself. So it's a lot easier for you to refer to the individual save files and more or less get a sense of where you were in the game, especially because they also have a little bit of text at the bottom telling you which chapter this is from. So if you are actually trying to progress your way through the game and save before each of the dialogue choices, this kind of helps a little bit in helping you sift through the different files, since compared to some games where they may not even give you a thumbnail and they might just put a single line of text there, or worse still, they don't even put any form of notation for you, like in terms of like what dialogue is going on or what chapter you're at or what point of the story you're in. For some games, it can be very difficult to then figure out which save you want to go to, other than through pure memory of the exact date and time that was in the save file itself. So the fact that they did have this thumbnail with the chapter names there, I feel like it's a decent amount of QOL that while it's not something super innovative, it's something that some games in that era were still kind of lacking. So I do appreciate that they actually had this. When it comes to the art and design as well, I feel like this game is just completely all over the place, both in terms of the direction as well as the budget, because it really feels like there's just no consistency at all between all of the different character styles. Like, rather than each character having a set of styles that you designed originally for the game to ensure that they are basically fairly consistent with the character, more or less just shifting between emotions. With this one, it feels like between every pose, between every single still that they have, the character just changes completely in terms of quality, to the point that sometimes it feels like they just, and I guess this really is the point, they really just took stills from the anime and just traced over and reused it in this game. And as a result, because of the fact that they probably couldn't find any good scenes or poses to use for specific emotions, they just took something that felt like it was just something that happened within the background in the scene within the anime, and therefore the quality is fairly low, and they just used it as the main stills within this game instead. And sometimes you do have them basically just taking those trace stills and just adding a little bit of decorations on top of it to give a bit more variety, and as a result it just feels extremely lazy. Especially for someone who actually watched the anime, you'll probably look at the stills and you actually recognize them as just being lifted directly from it. Meanwhile, if you're someone who has never watched the anime before, it feels like it'll just feel extremely weird because of the lack of consistency. Especially if you're someone who enjoys visual novels, this will all just feel even more jarring, I feel like. But even within that laziness, there's just this weird level of effort that goes into it, because they didn't just directly one-for-one copy-paste the character stills from the anime. Rather, they basically took those stills and they actually traced over it. And the reason why I say this is because there does seem to be some level of slight difference between the stills that are used within the anime as well as within the game, with sometimes the characters' body proportions as being just slightly different, like a slightly sharper and longer nose and stuff like this, which adds to the fact that basically they had put in enough effort to actually redesign some of these for the game, but at that point, why didn't they just make something original instead? It's really beyond me. Sometimes they would use scenes outright from the anime itself, both in terms of video formats where they actually had like short clips of certain scenes within the anime, as well as CG, like full-on images as well, where they basically took a scene, traced out the entire scene with the background and everything, and used those for certain scenes. But it feels like sometimes when a scene really could have used that to actually help the player understand better what's happening within the scene, they just don't have it. So sometimes you're just left with the characters just exclaiming something and you're expected to know what's going on. Like with the scene that's on screen now, where Nori, the lady on the left, actually prepares for them like a pair of omelets and a bacon and a smiley face for them to eat, even though they are dolls, so I don't know how the food even like processes through their bodies, but that doesn't matter for now. What does matter is the fact that after giving them the food and they start to eat it, she suddenly exclaims about how brutal it is, or like how like violent the way they're eating is, which you would think basically means that they're maybe eating in such a rough and like uncultured manner, perhaps just scarfing down all the food, and perhaps that's why she's mad. But the thing is that this was basically a scene from the show where she said the exact same thing, but the reason why she said it is because of the fact that Shinka, the doll on the left in red, basically cuts through the two omelets which comprise the eyes of the smiley face she made by slicing directly through the yolk, so it makes it look like she just like horrifically cut through the pupils of the smiley face instead, and that's why she was saying that like it looks so brutal instead. And in a way, the scene kind of helps to set up the whole level of ignorance, or perhaps the level to which the dolls don't consider things like this when they were eating the food, and the little gap between the way they perceive the world as compared to how Nori does. But all of this is completely glossed through, and you just get this one single static image and Nori suddenly exclaiming how like brutal or violent. So it's like we don't really get very much context into what exactly happens. If you had watched the anime, you would know what happened in the scene, and therefore it makes sense. But otherwise, you would at this point be wondering what she is even talking about when she talks about how they are being quite rough with it. This is especially a problem because of the fact that the game relies heavily on the flow of the original anime, with many scenes and the flow of the story itself pretty much being a one-for-one of the anime itself. Minus the animation itself, which was the whole point of, you know, an anime. So essentially you're basically getting the Rozen Maiden anime at home, because quite literally you play the game at home. Okay, that wasn't really that good of a joke, but either way, this was one of the big criticisms that people actually had of the game within Japan as well. That you were essentially paying for a full price game, which this game was 7,140 yen for the non-limited edition version of the game. So you were paying up to what basically something like Persona would have cost at the time, all for a visual novel that's basically an inferior version of the original show that it's based off of. Which I can kind of get why people call it a Kusoge game as a result, because it really brings into question who this game was really targeted at. Because if you were someone who really liked the original, you would probably get really bored with this because you're basically just going through the exact same plot points that you have already seen before, but in an even worse format because of the fact that now you have the whole thing with the scenes no longer being animated, and the visual novel format that the game is now in doesn't really add anything to it at all. Even the animated scenes that they had within this game were also inferior versions of these scenes within the anime, because and this was another thing that really blew my mind. Like, I don't understand like why they even bothered to do this, but they essentially took the scenes from the anime, but they took out and made the scenes even simpler by basically doing things such as removing the lip syncing itself. So now you get a scene that looks horrible because of the fact that you get animated characters just standing there with the mouth open going like, and somehow the voice itself is just still continuing to play in the background instead, which causes the scenes to feel just jarring and emotionless at points, because all of the emotional expression changes that the character will have gone through while speaking during the scene have all been replaced with that just singular plain death stare instead. But who knows, maybe there is a reason why the game decided to do this. Maybe there is an important lesson that the game is actually trying to teach us here.
HQ, it's me. Do you read me? It would seem the target is over there discussing something with someone around the corner. I'll move in closer and see if I can see what they're talking about. It's a good thing I spent all those years training on lip reading. Curses! That guy's a veteran player of the Rozen Maiden PS2 game. I've been foiled once again.
And on top of that, the animation just feels like it's a little choppy at times. Maybe it has something to do with the frame rate since it was a old PS2 game or something, but there's just something that feels a little off with the way that the characters were actually moving within the scenes, and the fact that sometimes you had them basically just standing there and pausing in the middle of animation because they just cut out a small segment of animation of the character's movement while special effects like movements were happening in the background and their mouth was completely still while words were coming out, made it feel like I was watching an FMV game for some reason, even though this whole thing was animated. And on top of that, sometimes the character stills just feel like they don't really match the emotion of the scene as well. Like you have this one right here.
挨拶もろくに返せないのかしら。まあいいわ。ひな一号、あなたたちは神聖なゲームを汚した。お父様はお怒りよ。違うもん。ひなはいつまでもおままごとが続くと思わないことね。あなたたちのローザミスティカを私が奪ってあげる。
The pink one, Hina Ichigo, is supposed to be very pissed at, and not in the whole like, haha, funny, oh you, naughty you, haha, sort of way, but in the, oh shit, you're threatening my existence, fuck you, sort of way, right? But for some reason, you have like her having expression, it looks like this instead, talking to someone who was basically saying that she needs to die because of her existence and all of that, because of the way the plot was flowing. I don't want to spoil it too much, but yeah, it just feels off instead. And sometimes with the music as well, you have scenes where it's a very serious scene where people are actually getting emotional, and then you just have music like this going in the background.
その方が僕もスッキリするって。
踊りたいよ。ひな、ともえのところに踊りたい。でも一緒にいられないじゃんもう。
あいつと何かあったのかよ。
Like, it really just doesn't add up at all, and it makes me question what the director of the game was actually doing this entire time, because I did look through the credits. There is a director, and it is, especially in the case of a visual novel, the director's job to ensure that all of these things come together, that the music, the characters' emotions, the way they cut into the scene, that all of this was being done right. So I don't know if they were just spending their time entitled smoking crack or something instead. Maybe they were just like doing like weed up their bunghole or something, but either way, it feels like they definitely weren't doing their job right. And before you tell me that this is just like, it's a character, like IP-based, like visual novel, of course it's gonna be bad. I would disagree, because even with the Ori Emo PSP game, like, I know people like to meme that series, especially the main, like, sister character as like being trash and all of that, but to be fair, even with their visual novel PSP game, they at least had the common decency to give you a completely new spin-off story which takes place after the anime ended, where the main character and her basically are spending time together in a period that happens after the anime had ended, and you're basically going through all of the different unique scenes that were unique to the PSP game itself, and you actually got like unique endings with all of the characters as a result. Not only that, but they actually had proper character stills prepared for each of the individual characters, like with actual lip sync and all for every single one of them as well. So even during the scenes where it's just characters still talking to each other, you actually had a lot of consistency within the way the characters pan from emotion to emotion, and the lip sync was actually there. Not perfect, but at least it was there to some extent. So if you don't know the series, yeah, you kind of just got a pretty mid visual novel with that one, but at least you got a visual novel experience that you could consider mid because of the fact that it at least gave you a consistent visual novel experience from start to end. And if you were someone who enjoyed the series, at least you were getting a unique experience with the game itself as compared to what we are getting with this Rozen Maiden game. However, this is where I give my first defense of this game, or I guess this is already the second one, since we kind of did give it a little bit of a defense earlier on in this. I'm not really keeping track. Maybe someone could put a counter here. It might be me, because I might be editing this video myself. And if I am, you better do it, me. I feel like the criticisms of this being a one-for-one of the anime itself was a little bit too harsh, to be honest. Like, sure, if you make dialogue choices within the game following what happened within the anime, you would basically get the anime plot more or less from start to end, more or less similar to the anime itself. But if you were to go off script and there were many dialogue choices that gave you the opportunity to, you did actually get unique short scenes at points which basically allowed you to deviate from the main plot itself. Yeah, sure, the overarching plot itself didn't really get affected by your actions, but at the very least, you did get unique little scenes that allow you to interact more with specific characters, or get to know specific characters even more, as you could basically deviate from the original plot and follow another character during a specific scene and see what they would do instead. Or perhaps when given the choice to decide on who to side with an argument, you could side with the other person and then get a different reaction from both of the characters present within that argument. And even during some of the plot crucial scenes themselves as well, like during the one with Suisei Seki and Sousei Seki and them going to the dream world for the old man and all of that. I'm not going to spoil it too much, but you basically actually had a choice to follow a different pair of characters as they traveled through the world itself. And depending on who you decided to follow during that scene, you basically got a different interaction with some of the characters and the overarching plot itself. And while the end result of the plot would be the same in that you would win and the person will be safe and all of that, the way you will get there is different, as the ways that you interact with all of the other characters within the plotline itself would actually change. And you would actually get to follow that plotline through the eyes of the other characters that within the anime itself were basically separated from the main protagonist and the group that he was with. Bizarre as it is, they also opted to remove some scenes and add in some new ones that weren't in the anime as well. Like with things such as like the very first scene of the anime where Shinku tries to reach for the door and is unable to reach it, and he actually like laughs at her a little for that, because you know she's like a doll and hence she's a lot smaller than a regular human, and so it's a lot tougher for her to reach the thing. I know that feeling very well myself, as someone who's actually a very small man. Going to homes outside of Japan really does scare me, because they tend to be built a lot higher than the ones in Japan. Either way, this was a good scene at the start of the anime, at least in my opinion, to show the more harmless sides of these dolls as well, because after showing the fact that they are basically like fighting machines taking part in like this death battle royals and all of that, it does kind of help to like lower the tensions to show like this weird funny side of them as well. It's a lot harder to visualize it without using a CG scene. Although the fact that they had the budget to draw like full-on CG images for some of the other scenes as well as to animate some, and they chose not to do anything for this one. It's a choice, I guess, since it's not a very important scene overall. And you also had more scenes added in with Shinke basically actually explaining to Jun, the main character of the game, all of the different types of tea leaves and how they were different and all of that. And you had the dialogue choice to pick what type of tea leaves she explains to you. Like, that didn't actually exist within the anime. Like, I actually went to rewatch the entire thing just to make sure. I guess in a way they help to portray a more refined and like intellectual image of her as compared to in the anime, where they also had a balance and like try to focus on her cute and derpy side as well, so that you actually got a bit of that waifu ball joint, you're gonna crush your dick trying to bang a doll sort of like vibe in as well. But with that one, I can still kind of get why they did it, and it does add in a little bit more of character development that wasn't in the anime. And so once again, in the small defense of this game, it wasn't as one for one as people in Japan like to put it. There were actually scenes that gave you a bit of levity and different forms of character development of the dolls as well. The ending even changes depending on who the character you end up in the final route with is, and you even get a unique animation for each of the routes. Although those also suffer from the same lip syncing issues, it's kind of unfortunate when it comes to that. When it comes to the endings themselves, the overall flow are largely just exactly the same as with the anime, except that each time the protagonist doll that you end up with at the end is different. So for those of you who didn't watch the anime, this might be a little bit of a spoiler, but with this one, I really feel that we need to kind of explain it to explain what is wrong with the way that the ending was made. So for those who didn't watch the anime, basically this was the part of the first season where you end up in the climactic battle between Shinke, which is the doll in the red dress, and Suigento, who is the villain with the black wings that appears later on in the middle of the series. And in the span of the battle, Shinke actually loses an arm, and Jun, the main character, actually comes in and tries to comfort her, and they slowly go through an arc over there, and he slowly grows as a person as he tries to fight to help her get back her arm, and they find out that he kind of has like some super magic powers because he could actually refit her arm. A little bit of like power scaling, like plot convenience happening there. But either way, climax of the series, and this is where he starts to grow as a person as well, so it was kind of very important for the development of the series going forward. And with the game, basically, instead of Shinke being the doll that you enter this part with, the doll that you end up at the ending with can vary between her, Suisei Seki, which is the one in green who's in big part of all the meimeis for the series for some of you who may have seen it. Maybe it's a little bit of a boomer meme at this point. It's a fairly recent meme, I would assume. Or you could end up with Hina Ichigo, which is the one in pink. Or all of the other dolls in the series aren't actually part of the ending, so yes, there's actually only 3 endings to this, so it's still a little mid when it comes to that. But either way, the ending for the other 2 characters, as well as for Shinke, all basically follow the exact same flow, where you go through the exact same plot points more or less. And the big difference is basically just in the fact that the different characters have like different lines as they go through the scene itself, and Jun kind of responds a little differently depending on which one of the 3 it is. And the post-battle, the post-climax scene, I feel like I'm so brain-rotted that the word climax just doesn't work in my brain the right way anymore, but the scene after the climax of the visual novels, like 6 arc, basically has a different ending with a short scene with each of the 3 dolls instead. And the funny thing is that there are actually some slight art variations between this, where depending on the character you end up with, the scene before this as well, which is where they reenact Sleeping Beauty for the sake of Jun's sister who needs to do it for a play for something or another. And what happens during the original anime is that Shinke is the one that plays Sleeping Beauty and the other 2 play the dwarves and the witch respectively. But basically for this specific game, you actually have a separate variation where each of them plays Sleeping Beauty instead. And for Hina Ichigo as well as Suisei Seki, who didn't get to play it originally, they just get a silly looking like funny crown just edited on top of their head. And in Suisei Seki's route specifically, you actually have Shinke playing the witch instead, and so you get this whole weird thing where she's the one acting all like somewhat mentally insane, and it actually ends up being a kind of funny scene instead because of the gap and actually seeing her play the villain in that all. it's already cool that they actually did all of this. And yet when it came to the actual climactic scene itself, where Jun was actually searching for the arm of the door that was lost, they actually just, they did the best, the most hardworking thing that you could ever expect someone to do, and basically reuse the same CG for all three of them. They just couldn't even be bothered to like just change it just that little bit. I mean, I know that they're all like dolls, like maybe it's like they can't really tell the difference too well because it's literally just a crafted piece of like, whatever, like porcelain or plastic or whatever the fuck Figma Nendo they used to craft the figure. But like even then, between the dolls, they all do have somewhat different builds and heights and all of that. So I feel like they could have at least done the very little bit of just changing the size of the hand. I mean, they were already doing all sorts of minor changes everywhere else, so I don't see why they couldn't do this as well. The CG as well as the character stills that they used, all the ones that they actually made specifically for this game actually look really good. Like I feel like a lot of them look better than the actual stills and CG that were reused from the actual like anime itself at points. Okay, maybe not that one. Although with this one, I kind of had a bit of a laugh because of like how bizarrely sized the actual still was compared to everything else. To be honest, like this is another one of those things that it just feels like it's just very off for some reason. And not only that, but they actually made an entire animated segment for the TV show that the dolls actually watched within the anime itself. The whole Detective Kun Kun thing with the funny dog that goes like Kun Kun, like I think some dust on the mic went into my nose there. Either way, the thing with the dog, the Detective Kun Kun scene, like it was actually extremely well done, all things considered. Like it was so well done that I initially thought that this was from like some other OVA for the show that I just missed out and I just didn't see it the whole time. It actually made me like feel so gaslit into thinking that I missed something out, that I went to rewatch every single season of the anime just to double check and make sure this wasn't like a slice of life filler episode scene from some other future episode of it. Turns out it wasn't, and this was actually an entirely original scene that was animated for this game. And when I see this, and I see the CG that they made for the final scene, where they basically replaced Shinku, the main character who was supposed to be the main one in the scene, with the other two characters, and I look at the quality at which it was done, it all looked actually pretty good. It made me question really like why they didn't just pay the artists to make unique stills for the entire thing. Just give all the animated scenes as well as the stills, the CGs, something unique for the game, since you're actually trying to make a game with this. And not only that, but they clearly had the budget. It's not like we're talking about like, these people are so lazy, they didn't have the money, they didn't want to invest the money, they're hoping to cash in on the game. No, they actually put an entire animated scene in. They actually redrew and traced all of the scenes from the anime. They actually redrew scenes for the original like segments of the game itself. They actually put in an effort to do all of those things, but they just couldn't be asked to like actually put the efforts in the right direction. This is like the one kid in school who the teacher tells them they should apply themselves more, and instead of actually trying to apply for a job when they grow up, they just apply for welfare benefits instead because of the fact that they just can't be asked to actually do anything in life. This feels kind of like that, where they had all the budget as well as the effort to do all of these things for the game, but they just put it into all the wrong directions, and somehow we got this thing that ended up being like, quite frankly, a console game instead. Because really, if there's anything that will make for good proof that this game is not a one-for-one copy of the anime, it will probably be scenes like this as well as some of the CGs within the game. Because yes, while the overall flow follows the anime, it still gives you a lot of unique and interesting things that I feel would be very good fan service for people who are really into the series. And I feel like, especially within the Japanese console game community, for the people who actually talked about this game, some of them just never even pointed out the existence of all of this at all. Like, I don't know if they just didn't know it existed, or they just left it out completely, not knowing that it was something unique because it looked so much like the anime, they just assumed it was instead. To be fair, I don't even really blame them for it, because it's hidden behind so many specific dialogue options and forks that if you were to make certain decisions instead, you could just completely breeze past this without realizing, and unless you are really willing to sit down and go through every single dialogue option choice like someone with brain damage like me would do, you might just miss some of these things out because the game just doesn't do a good job of showing you as the player that it has all this unique content. And because of that, some people are probably going to go through it missing out a lot of this and coming to the conclusion that it's just a copy of the anime instead, when it actually really has more content to it than one might expect. There's actually some level of effort put in a way that actually can give fans something interesting. So I can't say it's completely horrible and irredeemable because it actually has some slight redeemable points, just that these are kind of insufficient and not put on the forefront enough for the game to actually be able to make it a strong selling point either. Because, you know, I get that the episode of Kun Kun and the thing, like, and I've seen that people who have looked at the scene itself, which has been uploaded to YouTube in isolation on its own, people are like so happy to see this and they think it's really cool and all. But, you know, as much as I liked it too, I feel like with this game, there were many, many much bigger priorities that they could have put into the game in terms of the character experience and the IP experience they wanted to give their fans than actually having that Kun scene fully animated like that, to be honest. Like, you know, just investing into the ending scenes that was supposed to be the thing that would, like... Yeah, sorry about it. I had to drink a little bit of air because the frustration was getting to me a little bit. And anyway, on top of all the things we just mentioned, the endings themselves all also seem to be decided at about the same point, I think. Like, I could be wrong. Maybe it could be due to the fact that I made the decisions from the first part all the way to the end in very specific combinations that caused it to always end up being the case that the ending could be decided around the same point. But it feels like every time I played through this game and I got to around the same point and I tried to like save and reload the game and like try to fork the past from there, it always seems to fork well as somewhere around the middle of chapter 5 where you actually decide whose dream you actually want to visit among all of the dolls. And it would seem that every time I get to this point and make the decision specifically here, the route would basically split among all three of the characters. Like, initially I didn't think too much about it, and the thing is that because the game only gives you 18 save files, it's very hard to actually like go back, test and compare. So with some of my earlier save files where I didn't actually like pay too much attention to all this, I couldn't really like double check with those, so I had to play through the game a lot more. This small thing as well, like it's not as big a deal, but the number of save files the game gives you is quite minute. I think there's only like 18. Most visual novels they give you like 99. They'll just give you the cap that they can. And it kind of helps because for people who really want to like get a full 100% playthrough of the game, this basically allows you to save every single fork in the path potentially so that you can actually experience everything. This game doesn't give you enough for that. It really makes it feel like most of my choices prior to the middle of chapter 5 just never really mattered at all. Which, considering the game is 6 chapters long, that actually means that replaying the whole game to basically try to get the experience of all the 3 characters' routes is actually quite a massive waste of time, since you could basically play through the first 5.5 chapters once and have the entire experience of it, and you basically wouldn't have it affect any of the endings as well, and you could just replay the last 1.5 chapters and basically experience all of the 3 endings. So yeah, it just feels like a massive waste of time when I finally realized that was a thing. And it also made it feel like all of the decisions, all the choices I made from the start of the game were just completely pointless. Like, yeah, I mean, you did get like these small story flavor things where you would actually get that little bit of like, haha, funny, my doll joint is now better than your doll joint, or some weird thing like that where the story just diverges that little bit because of the fact that you talk to one of the dolls instead of the other one. But really all of those scenes just end up being like small fan servicey things that doesn't really impact the overall flow of the story. So you're just getting more slice of life funny ha-has, which for all intents and purposes aren't even canon and don't really have any influence on the plot whatsoever. So glad to know that this game, which actually, like, you know, as a visual novel, is meant to like give you a ability to make your own choices to get to your own endings actually just has most of your choices not matter at all. Yeah, illusion of choice, very awesome! Though I guess you wouldn't really suffer all that much playing through this game from start to end over and over for every single path, since in the end, each of the chapters are only about an hour long. So if you were to go through each of the 6 chapters and then you went to like replay the final chapter only to get the other 2 routes, effectively this game would be maybe about like 9 hours, like give or take, like if you took like a bit longer to like go through some of the scenes in between again because you want to reread all of it, making it extremely short compared to most other actual like proper version novels out there, with games such as Subahibi, I'm pretty sure taking like 6 hours just to actually get to a point where it's interesting. And if I recall, just the prologue alone for something like Aeon or Acelia was like 3 to 4 hours long. So yeah, you know, it's way shorter than most of the visual novels of that era as is. So even as a visual novel, it doesn't feel like you're getting very much out of this because of the fact that you're just getting way less content than you could have if you had actually gotten like pretty much any other visual novel out there. Additionally, the game also has some very questionable segments added to the visual novel parts of the game, and some of this, I feel like they added it in to try to like spice things up a little, but they just ended up making the experience feel horrible instead. For example, they had QTE like multi-choice dialogue options. Like why? Like 5 seconds to make a choice? What am I playing like the first 2 like Idolmaster games on the Xbox? What the fuck is all this? When I play a visual novel, I wanna be able to expect that I can just sit back, relax, go through the story, and like when it comes to the story and the flow of it, I'll have the time to sit there and reflect on what has just transpired. Try and maybe ruminate a little about all of the things that have happened to the characters within it. Maybe even try to visualize some of the scenes in my mind, since the game typically only gives you like backdrops and like character stills. So all of that I find to be really fun. The last thing I really need while like I'm trying to ruminate on the failures of mankind while staring at cute girls doing cute things is for the game to suddenly come in and pop in and just be like, hey, it's time to pick a choice. You have 5 seconds. Go. It feels very stressful, especially since typically with these, I want to be able to sit down and like drink something on the meantime. So for this option to just pop out suddenly like this and just start counting you down really keeps me as the player on edge a lot more. I feel like it keeps me constantly worrying that one of these is going to pop out. So I have to like stay in this weird state of tension where I'm just like always constantly on edge to ensure that I'm paying attention enough, and also really just sitting there ready enough for the dialogue options to pop out so I can read them quickly and pick one, because sometimes 5 seconds to read through 2 dialogue options that can be somewhat long, like depending on the length of a sentence, to look through both sentences and decide which to go with can be kind of difficult. If the game actually did this for every single dialogue option, I feel like it wouldn't be as bad, because then I as a player would know to be on guard and ready at all times. But the issue is that this only happens once every like 20 to 30 minutes, once maybe every 5 to 6 dialogue options. Then there are also the roulette choices where they basically make you roll a roulette to basically pick which of the choices the character's gonna go with. Most of the time you're rolling for success or failure, kind of like with like you're playing D&D or something. And the thing is that for this one, I feel like it just causes the player to feel bad, because it feels like it removes most of the player agency from the situation itself, as you don't really get to pick the dialogue option that you want to go with, and it's not like you're being rewarded for some other action that you took beforehand. And with some of the scenes, I feel like it's something where it could have been a lot better done if they actually had it connect to something that you had done beforehand instead. Like for one of it, it was basically where you're supposed to guess what the favorite food of one of the character is, and instead of letting the players try to infer it from the scene before, or better yet, if you're someone who's a fan and you actually infer it from actually knowing what happens in the anime, you get rewarded for that. Instead of all of that, they actually force you to roll it in a roulette. If it doesn't go your way, you just feel kind of bad, and the worst part is that you are gonna have to constantly re-roll this over and over to get the option that you desire. And this, I would imagine, can create some level of frustration for the player, as they're just simply not able to make the dialogue choices that they wish to make, and a lot of it just being left arbitrarily up to luck for no apparent reason at all. Thankfully, this mode, I guess this little mini game with the roulette is actually fairly easy to predict if you're willing to sit there with the level of brain damage required to actually try and figure it out, because the timing is all relatively fixed. So when you know how it rolls, you can very easily then like try to land on the specific options you want. But I feel like most like ordinary people who aren't actually like trying to smoke like the equivalent of Kusoge crack would probably have just given up and just like thrown the game into the wall and probably had to pay damages for the rental apartment they're living in. No, this is not me projecting or something. That, and there's also a very peak gameplay mode in this. For you see, the game that this isn't actually just a visual novel. Instead, it is also okay, thank God it's not that much. Well, suffice to say that didn't really go according to plan at the very least. But that's right, this is indeed one of those Touhou games that we all know and love. We all love it, right? Right? Well, I guess you could say this is kind of like Touhou at home, as it really is just a worse version of it. Because for one thing, this game is really just the boss battles only, which is kind of different from Touhou, because with Touhou, you kind of do have like the fancy flashing lights going across the screen, looking like the death note for a person with epilepsy. But the thing is, those, while they are the very cool boss battles that people remember about Touhou does have like a earlier segment where you fight against mobs and you try to fight your way towards the boss instead. Only the boss battles in this game, this Rozen Maiden game, actually feel more like the mob battle segments within Touhou instead, because it actually uses a lot more random projectile firing, kind of like with the mob waves of Touhou, where you basically have all of the mobs just swarming around and targeting mostly specifically at the player. And so depending on the player's position, the mob firing can actually be a little random and cause you to actually be stuck in a situation where you just can't dodge the bullets because there isn't that pixel perfect frame to dodge through. It's why some people actually consider it to be the harder part of Touhou itself at points, because at least with the boss battles, you do have a typically at least one frame pixel space that you could dodge through if you know what you're doing. But because of the fact that this is mostly using projectile firing instead, it can be a lot more frustrating, especially for those who aren't used to the genre. And not only that, but the hitbox in this is actually a lot bigger as well. And by this, what I mean is that it actually covers the whole body of the character, unlike in something like Touhou or even some of the other shoot 'em ups in the genre, where sometimes parts of, like, let's say the spaceship or the plane, the tip of the tail wing doesn't really count. With this game, the entire body counts, so you do have a little bit of a weird shape. And especially with the arms of the characters, because of the fact that they just start like jutting out a little at the side, they can be a little harder to gauge with. And the issue with this is that it wouldn't be so bad if the game actually understood what it was doing and actually tried to work around this. But the issue is that because it seems like the guy who made this really seems to really have a big like Reimu boner, they actually made the spaces between the individual bullets about the same as with like Touhou's maybe like normal difficulty, without realizing that because Touhou and like some of these other games, they do have much smaller actual hitboxes compared to the character's actual like character sprite that's actually possible to dodge. But because this game actually uses the whole thing, you can't actually dodge through the spaces that they actually put in the game itself. I don't know if they even playtested this to actually realize this, because I feel like if you played even like any of the levels in it, this would be something you would realize very quickly and probably like decide whether or not to fix right away. On the bright side though, the bomb in this game is actually on a cooldown, so unlike most of the other games within the genre where the number of bombs, which is basically the thing you push to like do a big like flashy attack and like clear all the bullets on the screen, those in most of the games in the genre tend to be limited in the number you have for the stage. With this game, it's just purely on the cooldown. You can use it unlimited number of times as long as it's off cooldown. So the game gets a lot easier, especially since the cooldown is maybe only like 10 to 15 seconds instead, so you can actually spam this quite consistently. Also, I don't know how they managed to mess this up to this extent, but it seems like when you use the bomb, well, it does pause time and basically erase all bullets on the screen during the animation of the bomb. For some reason, the time isn't paused for the boss, so the boss can continue to cast their attacks. And for some reason, when they cast their attacks, because time is paused, the projectiles that he spawns will just stay on the spot that he spawns them. And only after the bomb's animation ends does all the bullets that weren't erased by the initial cast all just instantly fly out at once, like some kind of fucking Dio Brando Zawardo shit going on. Which in a way kind of makes the stages harder at times, because now if you were to use the bomb to erase the attacks, you then have to deal with an even bigger and even more, in a way, random wave of attacks coming your way, as you'd have to now deal with all of the bullets frozen and time all simultaneously moving in a way that can erase any form of escape route that you have as well. And in a way, it actually kind of feels like the game might have been designed around this simply due to the fact that you don't really have a good way to dodge the attacks, and therefore it really makes it feel like the only way you can get through many of these attacks is by using the bombs at the right times to clear out the attacks, so that you can basically avoid the unavoidable ones and avoid or like just dodge your way through everything else. Which makes it very, very problematic, especially during the segments of the game where you actually can't use a bomb, which you would think that for a game like this, where it does feel like they were balancing it around the bomb, they wouldn't be stupid enough to actually do something like give you a segment without the bombs themselves. But they actually do it, and not only that, but they only do it for very specific segments, like, you know, the final battle for one of the characters only. Like, out of the 3 characters, I think only Suisei Seki doesn't have it, and I think that there's like some slight like plot specific relevance to it, because she's the only one that you don't have a contract with. No, that's not even true. You don't really have a contract with Hina Ichigo either, because like the way the game works is that it follows the anime's plot, and with the anime's plot, you form, or Jun forms a contract with Shinku, and only Shinku, and Shinku kind of is using your body and your power to basically transfer it, like mana transfer. No, that's gonna give people the wrong idea. To Hina Ichigo, while Suisei Seki completely gets nothing at all, because she's just completely unrelated to all of that. So there isn't really a specific reason why only Suisei Seki doesn't have it for her final battle, and it actually makes the battle significantly harder, because the boss's attack patterns don't really change between which character you're using, and so it just makes her battle specifically harder, because now you basically have a completely different game on your hands, where you need to tactically like take damage by dodging through specific attacks that minimize the amount of damage, so that you can actually beat the boss before you go down in a very weird attrition battle. And the thing that feels really bad about this is just the fact that it only happens specifically for her. So it's not like this is something that the game expects you to learn and to figure out and to do for all of the battles before this. It just feels instead like you're being punished at this specific battle. Now, thankfully, you can actually reduce the difficulty to easy mode. You know, we ain't gonna do that. I actually played the game on hard mode, and so maybe that made it significantly harder than it had to be. But at the same time, overall, I feel like with the way it's made, it's just a very poorly choreographed battle segment overall, because it doesn't do a very good job of letting the players know how they actually should be going through this segment, as the game just doesn't really do a good job of building up towards this and getting the players to understand the styles of play that are required for them to get through the game itself. That said, you know, the shoot 'em up segments, I feel like they are still kind of a welcome like respite between the visual novel segments, as they do actually give you a fair amount of warning and prep time to get ready before the battle starts, and they actually let you pause as well, so you can actually get into the right mood to do it. You have significant time to prepare. But as a shoot 'em up itself, I feel like it just does a very subpar job of being a shoot 'em up, which I know that it's not meant to be one specifically, but even then it does a very poor job of actually being a entertaining segment within the game as a result. But yeah, I would say that's pretty much all of the issues I have with this game. I would say overall the biggest issue that it has is just that it doesn't really do a very good job of reaching out to a any like specific target audience. The game skips through a lot of the world and character building at the start and lacks a lot of the CGs to basically make a lot of the scenes like make sense and help you visualize the scene. So if you're someone who doesn't know the IP, I feel like you're just not gonna get much out of this, as you're gonna be very confused during some of the scenes, as the game doesn't do a good job of describing them to get you to understand what's happening. You won't really know well who some of the characters are, what their motivations are. Some of that has been omitted as well. And the overall quality of life within these systems themselves also feel very lacking at times. So if you're someone who's really into visual novels, I feel like there are just so many things lacking in that department as well, that it feels like you could very well easily find many other better visual novels out there that you could be getting into instead. Simultaneously, it doesn't do a very good job of targeting people who are actually fans of the IP, as it basically originally at the start just provides a inferior version of the anime, which most of the people who are fans of the IP and who are willing to drop 7,000 yen for this game probably aren't gonna be as interested in just seeing a one-for-one retelling of the plot. But while this game isn't a one-for-one retelling, it does have like little like unique moments within it that are meant to target the fans. These are embedded so deep within this overarching game that at surface feels like a one-for-one, that it feels like many of the fans are gonna just be so disappointed and bored before they actually reach the points where they would see these differences and how good some of the differences actually are. And the endings themselves are just a little insufficient, I feel like, to actually justify all of the effort required to get to them. And the amount of fan service in terms of just like entertainment value that fans can get out of the game that they otherwise would not have been able to get anywhere else is just still a little insufficient for how much content or time you have to spend getting through this game. Which, once again, it's not a lot of time, but it's precisely because it's not a lot of time, and a lot of that time, or a percentage of that time, is just rehashing content from the anime, is part of why I can see it being considered as big of a Kusoge game as it was at the time. Although I do feel after playing through this, and as I've mentioned multiple times in this video, that there are redeeming things that it did, and therefore I wouldn't really consider it as big of a Kusoge game as some people out there have made it out to be. But it is still really quite bad. Yeah, I wouldn't want to play this again, to be honest. Maybe just for the Kunkun scene, but like I feel like I just go on to YouTube and watch that instead. I don't really want to play through this again. Thank you very much. So yes, a very boring, confusing mess going through it, and it looks very bare bones compared to what many of the other character and IP based visual novels out there have done before. And so I rate this game one Uesugi Kenshin riding a horse out of maidens that are Rozen Title's Best Edition. That's it. That's all for me for today. So thank you all for watching this video once again. I hope it was interesting. With this one, you know, it isn't like one of the big super classic like Kusoge game titles within Japan, just one that people online in Japan have also talked about before. So I figured I would talk about it, in part because of the fact that I had this game lying around for quite a while already. And after playing it through, initially I thought this was going to be a short video of me like going like, haha, bad visual novel, bad. But it ended up being a lot longer than I expected. And after playing through it, you know, there are segments of this game that are actually good, and it actually made my brain feel a little funny inside because of the fact that it was trying to figure out how best to make a video about this game, because, well, it was bad. It wasn't actually as bad as I thought it would be. So I'm actually kind of disappointed in that sense, because I was hoping to be suffering a lot more. I feel like I'm a little brain damaged in that sense, but yeah, overall not that bad of a game. Thank you all for watching once again, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you to the very epic people here who helped to support the channel, as thanks to you guys that I can continue to make very epic videos like this one. And also the game industry ones, which I feel like people are probably like the bigger majority are interested in. But either way, I hope you guys enjoy videos like this as well nonetheless. But until next time, take care and bye-bye.